Good morning. You ever had a question, maybe you just thought it, or you actually said it, and it was, "Are you there, God? Like, do you see what's going on here? Do you understand what's happening here? Are you there?" We're beginning a 3-week series starting today that's going to wrestle with that question in particular. Are you there? Because I think we've all dealt with that, right? At one time or another, for whatever reason or another. Maybe it was that job promotion or that new job that you were trying to get, and you thought this would be great, and you were qualified for it, and it looked like it should be going your way, and all of a sudden somebody else got it. Are you there, God? What's up? You and your spouse put down a bid on a house, and you wanted it. It would have been perfect. It was just exactly what you wanted, and somebody else outbid you, and they got it. You got a diagnosis from the doctor that was not in your favor, or maybe a loved one did. And we think these questions of, are you there? A relationship goes south. Like, what happened? And something happens that you weren't even expecting, and now this occurred, and it's like, Lord, do you see? Are you there? Anybody ever dealt with that? The rest of you? Your sin is lying. We all have. So we've had moments like this when our present experience of what we're currently going through, and maybe you can really relate to this, it just doesn't make sense. And we are saying in our hearts, Lord, are you there? Do you see? And the answer, of course, is yes, he's there. Of course he is. He promised, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we know that he is always there. But how do we navigate those times in our lives where we don't see the evidence of it? And we wonder, Lord, do you see? Are you there? That's what we're going to look at. So let me ask you a question. How many of you are movie lovers? Really? I mean, like, you're not just movie appreciators. You love a good movie. You love a good movie, yeah? In my 20s, about 15 years ago, in my 20s, I fell in love with movies. Now, I'd been to movies before that. I was preaching to movies, but in 1993, I went and saw, it was a weird day. I can remember this day because this is the day where it happened, when I fell in love with movies. I was just feeling restless, and I didn't know what to do, and it was like the middle of the day. I had a day off. It was the middle of the day, and I did something very uncharacteristic for me in the middle of the day, and I went to the movie theater. So I drove down to the movie theater. I didn't even know what was playing. I was like, I'm just going to watch a movie. And so I walked in, and my life was changed. I watched this movie with Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones called The Fugitive. Do you remember The Fugitive? Oh, my gosh. I walked out of there going, what just happened here? In fact, last night, I introduced my wife to The Fugitive. I knew we were going to be, I was going to mention it, so I was like, and babe, by the way, you're welcome for that. She has now had the Fugitive experience. So I did. I became a lover of movies after that, because what it is for me, what makes a movie great for Mark is the suspense factor. I like to have my share of anxiety if I'm in a movie, right? I like bring it. Not all the time. In fact, many times I just like to binge and watch just ridiculous, over-the-top, dumb movies, which is why Dumb and Dumber, in my opinion, should be one of the greatest movies listed of all time. But if I'm going to have a movie experience, and I'm going to have a movie, I want that thing to grab me. I want it to take me on a journey. I want the twists and the turns and wait, who's this person and what's going on there and how are you going to get out of that? And I want plots and turns and all kinds of things. I want Hollywood to throw at me all the anxiety I can handle. I want suspense. I love movies. I really do. And I'm not the only one. I know many of you do. And all cultures have loved stories and passed down their history from stories and the telling of stories and life's lessons from stories. So I'm going to tell you a story today, okay? You can read this story in the Old Testament. It's from a small book. It's only 10 chapters long. You can read it in like just one sitting. In fact, I hope you do that this week. It's the book of Esther. And you just read that. It doesn't take long, and because we're going to be in this book for the next few weeks. Okay, so I'm going to begin the story today. Pray for me as I go into this story, because I was supposed to be living on a good 7 hours of sleep today, and I did not realize it was daylight saving time. So for me, I'm still supposed to be waking up. Anybody in that club with me? Look around. There's some empty seats here. There's people in that club today. All right, so this story, this is a true story. It has several plot twists. It gives us powerful lessons about God. It takes place in the year 468 BC. 468 BC. And most of the Jewish population at this time is scattered throughout the Persian Empire. About 100 years earlier, and we talked about Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon and all that a couple months ago. 100 years before this story took place, Persia and the king, the emperor, overthrew Babylon. And so overthrew the Babylonian Empire at that time. His name is Cyrus. He was kind of a decent king in that the slaves, like the Jewish slaves, the ones who were taken off from Jerusalem to Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, he let them go and he released them not to be slaves. And so the Jewish people in all of Israel right now had scattered. Some stayed in what was Babylon. Some stayed in Jerusalem in the beginning, and others were just scattered throughout 127 different provinces of the Persian Empire. And so this is where they're at. The first person in our story is really the grandson of the Persian king who conquered Babylon. And so now this guy, his name is Xerxes, and he is the king of Persia and the whole Persian Empire, all 127 provinces. And he's not a good dude. This guy is an egomaniac. He is completely into one thing, himself. He is perverted. He is power hungry. He's not a good dude. So if his name sounds familiar to you, King Xerxes, it's because he is a part, you might remember it from that family fun movie about the Spartans called 300. Do you remember that guy? Right? So true character. Now he's the king of Persia at this time, and he's full of himself. In fact, in Esther chapter 1, this guy decides to throw a party that goes on for 180 days. That's half a year. Oh, what's the party for? To celebrate his greatness. And so he throws this party for 180 days stretched throughout. Everybody has to do it, or whatever province you live in. And then at the end of the 180 days, he goes for another 7 days just with his top officials in a total perverted drunken fest of debauchery. And so these guys are lit. They have been partying for 180 days. Now they got 7 days on top of that where they are just out of their stinking minds and full of themselves and drunk and a bunch of perverts. And King Xerxes gets the idea, hey, my wife is a babe. These guys need to see what I got. And so he says, I want my queen. Here's the second person I'm introducing to you today. If you got notes around your outline, you write these people in. This is Queen Vashti. So he sends for Queen Vashti to come in and parade her in front of all of his drunken friends. And Vashti has a little dignity. So Queen Vashti says, no way, ain't doing it. And Xerxes is like, because you don't say no, to who he is. And so he's taken aback. And even all of his leaders, his top officials say, you got to do something about this. You let the queen get away with not doing what you say. How's that going to look for our wives? We've come a long ways, people. Vashti says no, and they say, well, you got to get rid of her. And so they do. They remove her for this cross of hers. They remove her from queen, and they banish her from the kingdom. She's gone now because of that one event. And so now the officials are like, well, we got to replace her. How are we going to do that? And so they decide, Let's send our officials out across the 127 provinces of Persia, and we will look for the most beautiful young ladies there are. Because that's all it really mattered in order to be the queen, I guess. We're going to look for the most beautiful. This was the Persian idea of the Bachelor show, right? We have created nothing new. And so They do that, and they go out into all of Persia, and they're looking for these beautiful young ladies who will become a part of the king's harem, and one of them may become the next queen. So now I want to introduce you to two more characters, because while they're out there searching, we run into these two people, and they are cousins. The first is Mordecai. Mordecai is a Jewish man. He's a peasant, and that's not a bad term. He's just a peasant farmer and worker. And his cousin is Esther. Now, Esther was orphaned as a young girl, lost her parents, and so Mordecai has kind of been like a surrogate father, although Esther is his cousin. And so Esther happens to be very beautiful. And so she was taken from Mordecai, taken from her home, and brought, not signed up to participate in a game show, brought and put into the king's harem. Now think about it, because these are stories for us, but I wonder if Esther was saying, are you even there, God? What's up? I already lost my parents. Now Mordecai, and now this? Are you there, God? So she goes and she's in this harem. She's put into a 1-year beauty program. 1 year of nothing but beauty treatments. Obviously, some of us do that every 6 years. 1 year, spices and oils and massages and everything else to get ready. And while this is going on, every day Mordecai is checking in on Esther. He has moved over there, and now he always walks outside the gate, because the harem of King Xerxes gets to have some time where they walk in the garden, and he's on the pathway that separates the palace from where he is. And he would talk to her, just encourage her. And one of these times where he was there, he told her, he said, remember, don't tell anybody that you're Jewish. That's not going to go well for you, so keep that hidden. And that's going to become an important part of the story. And so they do this. The last player in our story I want to introduce is a Persian official named Haman. Time he shows up, Esther had already won the king's favor. She had come in and presented herself to him. It was about a year later, and he looked on her favorably, and it says that he loved her more than the rest, which means, in honesty, not jokingly, he lusted for her more than the rest. And he made Esther the queen. So Esther is queen, and now comes this guy, Haman. Haman is an advisor to the king, to King Xerxes. He's an advisor, and he is as full of himself as the king is. He is evil, and he is greedy. And we're going to come back to him in just a minute. So I want to jump to the plot. So this is what happens now that we know the characters. First thing you could write down in your outline is Mordecai saves the king. Okay, you tracking with me so far? So Mordecai, remember, all the time he'd come out and he'd walk beside the gate in order to be able to spend some time with Esther. And one time he's outside the palace and he's waiting for Esther to show up, and he overhears these two guys who are plotting an assassination attempt on King Xerxes. And so he gets this information. He happened to be in the right place at the right time, and he tells Esther about it. He says, Esther, you got to warn the king about this. Not because the king is so good, but this is the right thing to do, and it's going to probably bring favor. And so Esther does. Esther goes to the king and tells him about this assassination attempt that's plotted against him, and the assassination is stopped. It worked. And so Mordecai, the chapter 3 opens up with Mordecai, and you probably think he's going to get rewarded for this, and so he's going to get a promotion and come out of being a peasant and get some recognition and some favor. But none of that goes to him. In fact, all the reward goes to Haman, this evil dude. And I'm wondering again, with Esther, with Mordecai now, does Mordecai think, how come it always goes better for other people? I keep trying. Are you there, God? Do you see me? I'm trying my best to do these things. So from there, the story gets darker. Haman plots to kill all the Jews. Each day, Haman, remember the second in command, each day when Haman walks into the palace, because he is a super important person, especially in his own eyes, but because he's super important, everybody stands up and they bow before him, and they bow down, except for one guy. Mordecai never bows before him, and it infuriates Haman because he loves the attention, but Mordecai doesn't bow before him. Haman is a descendant of Agag. Agag is, that's why he's called, if you read this story, you'll see he's called Haman the Agagite. Can you say Agagite? God bless you. Haman is an Agagite, and the Agagites and the Jews are extremely hostile. So Mordecai is like, I'm not bowing before this guy. I'm not bowing before anybody, let alone an Agagite. So because of this, Haman's anger towards the Jews, and in particular towards Mordecai, is just roused. He's hated the Jews, and now this guy won't show him the respect he deserves. And so what he does is he conjures and manipulates the king and comes up with this plan to get rid of the Jews, all of them. He goes to the king, Xerxes, and says, there's a group of people, a large group of people, that show you no respect, King Xerxes. They pay you no honor. They're rebellious, and they're not for you. And I think it's going to spread if we don't do something about it. I think they need to all be killed. And he's like, Xerxes is like, yeah, all right, do it. Get rid of them. We can't have that kind of dissent in the Persian Empire. Doesn't tell him who the group of people are. But the king signs a decree into law that calls for the extinction, the extermination of all the Jews in 11 months. And here's the thing, once that is signed into law, even the king himself can't take it out of law. And so this goes out right now, a new decree. It's read throughout 127 provinces, and it's saying this in 11 months, the 11th month of the year, all the Jews will be killed. Can you imagine living with that as a Jewish person? Are you there, God? What's going on, God? Knowing that something's going to happen? So Mordecai, he hears this decree, and he's thinking, Esther's got to do something. And so he sends word to Esther in the palace, right, who is now queen, saying, you need to help us. Your people are going to be killed. And Esther responds and says, I don't even get to see him that often. And if I go in front of him without being invited to go in front of him, there's a good chance I can die. So Mordecai, I don't know what I can do. She sends that back to him. And then he responds again to her and sends her a letter. And in this letter right now, it's not really a rebuke, but what it is Esther, hey, it's time. It's a wake-up call to faith. And this is a central verse right here, central passage. I want us to look at it. Esther chapter 4. Mordecai sends word to Esther. He says this, just because you live in the king's palace, don't think that all of the Jewish people, out of all of the Jewish people, you alone will escape. If you keep quiet at this time, someone else will help save the Jewish people. But you and your family's family or your father's family will all die. And who knows? You may have been chosen queen for just such a time as this. And Esther sent this answer to Mordecai. Go, get all the Jewish people in Susa together. For my sake, fast, do not eat or drink for 3 days and nights. And I and my servant girls will also fast. And then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I die, I die. So Mordecai went away and did everything Esther had told him to do. So now everyone is praying and fasting. And then after 3 days of everybody in Israel and Mordecai and Esther and her folks were praying and fasting, she gets the courage and she goes before the king Xerxes. Again, uninvited. And the only way that you can live when you're uninvited into the king's presence is if he holds out his golden scepter. Says, okay. So Esther walks in uninvited, and the king sees her and holds out the golden scepter and says, it's so good to see you. And he takes delight in her and says, ask me anything. It's yours. Up to half of the kingdom. It's yours. And she's like, and I was reading this again this week because I love this story. I'm thinking, I wonder what she's thinking here. And so she goes, you and Haman, would you come to my house tonight for dinner? For a banquet that I want to throw you. And he's like, yeah, can do. And Haman as well. And so they do. They get there and they go to dinner with Esther. And then Xerxes, when he's at dinner that night with Haman, he asks her again and says, okay, what can I give you? What is your petition? And she says it again. And I'm wondering, you ever been in a situation where it's like you want to do it, but you're afraid to go, tomorrow? Right? I don't know what she's feeling, but she says, if it pleases the king, I have an amazing banquet that I want to throw for you and for Haman at my house. tomorrow. So the king says, okay. And Haman, at this point, he's feeling incredible because he's like, I got invited with the king to Esther's place. I'm doing it. I'm the guy. And he goes home that night and he is bragging to his wife and to his friends about all these things that are excellent in his life. But that same night, the king, Xerxes, he can't sleep. Now, when we can't sleep, we'll watch a movie or grab our phone or do whatever else. He doesn't. He has the Chronicles of the Persian Empire in his reign brought to him and read. He can't sleep. He wants to hear the great things about himself. This is this guy. And so the servant comes and starts reading. In that spot where he started to read the stories of the Chronicles, the happenings of the Persian Empire under his reign, it happens to fall in the time that this man named Mordecai thwarted an assassination attempt and saved his life. He read about that. And he said, in the morning, he asked his guys, he said, what did we ever do for this man Mordecai? And they said, it was overlooked. We didn't. And so he goes, where's Haman? And Haman comes in. Remember Haman and Mordecai, right? So Haman comes in, and the king asks him, Xerxes asks him, he says, hey, Haman, what should the king do for a man that he greatly favors? And he wants to show his love and his respect and his favor to this man. What should the king do for such a man? And Haman is thinking he's talking about him. So he's like, well, I'll tell you what you ought to do. You ought to get like the fanciest royal robe and clothe that man with it. And then a royal horse and put this man on the royal horse with his royal robe. And then have somebody lead him throughout the town shouting, this is what the king's favor looks like. This is a man who the king smiles upon. And I think that would be great, king. And the king says, okay, Haman, in fact, that was a great idea. You do that for Mordecai. Isn't that right? It's a great movie, man. God's got a sense of humor, right? And so he has to do it. And he's leading them. This is what Xerxes does. Favor. Oh, he's infuriated. He can't wait for that 11th month to happen. In fact, he constructed this 50-foot pole that was going to impale Mordecai specifically and kill him. So now, they get to the banquet that night. Esther says, or the king Xerxes says to Esther, okay, what is it that you would want? Up to half of the kingdom. What is your petition? And this is what she said. King, someone has manipulated you. Someone has manipulated you, taken advantage of you, and has made a plan to kill myself and all of my people. And the king says, who? Who's done this thing? And she says, Haman. That guy right there. And Haman is like, he turns like sheet white, like, oh, good night. And the king is so furious. One, because you did this to my queen, to her people, and I enacted it. It can't be taken back. He storms out. He's on the patio of sorts. And while he's in there, Haman throws himself at Esther. The king walks back in, Xerxes, and sees Haman throwing himself at his wife and says, what? It's not enough that you want to kill them? You want to accost my wife right now? And he has him immediately killed on the very pole that Haman built to kill the Jew Mordecai. Talk about plots. So sneak peek for next week. Mordecai gets Haman's position. And then there's some other events that happen that are just kind of crazy. But here's what I want to look at for a few minutes in regards to this story. When we are in the problem and the solution has not come yet, we can feel God's silence. We can think that he's not working, that he doesn't care. And yet, even in this story here of Esther, we see that even in silence, God's sovereign hand is always working. I want that to speak to your heart. His sovereign hand is always working. Here's the personal application. You can write this down. God's silence is not absence. Okay? Has anyone besides me ever felt like God wasn't answering your prayers? Like, what's up, God? You pray and pray, and you feel like you see anything. You're not seeing the answer. Times like that make us wonder if God is there. But when we think about like this story of Esther and the moments that just seemed random, right? And things that were just happening as the narrative was being played out, as the story of life was just happening, and it seemed random. But consider the relevance. Consider the relevance of these things. I mean, what if there had never been a 180-day party? Certainly you don't see God's hand in that, but without that, and then the 7 day of drunkenness at the end, and Vashti, what if she didn't refuse? Then there would have been no need for Esther. What if Mordecai wasn't in that right spot at that right time to hear about an assassination attempt? Or what if he wasn't overlooked and he was given a reward right there at that time, and then all of a sudden he was left out of the bigger picture that was happening? Do you see what I'm saying? We don't always understand what's going on in the moment. To us, it's just these random occurrences of life that seem we check fair or not fair or makes sense or doesn't make sense or God, no God. And we check them and we don't realize, wait a second, he is always sovereign. He is always working. Sometimes we see it and sometimes we don't. And I want you to know, God is not absent in your life even when you don't see the proof of it. He is there. He is caring. He is working. Look at what the scripture says in Romans 8:28. It says, we are confident that God is able to orchestrate everything. Say everything. Say it again. Let your ears hear it. Everything. The good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly, the tragic, the blessing. That God is able to orchestrate everything to work towards something good and beautiful when we love him and accept his invitation to live according to his plan. God's silence is not absence. It's not absence. And second, know this, write this down. God's silence is not indifference. It's not indifference. You ever felt like God wasn't doing as much as he could? Like you've got the power, why aren't you using it? I think all of us have struggled with that from time to time. What's going on? And in these moments, we can be tempted to think that God is indifferent. That somehow he is not interested in what I am going through. But God's inactivity is never apathy. It's never apathetic. He's not indifferent to your pain, to your loss, to your trials, to your sufferings, the things that you are going through. The story of Esther reminds us that he is always, even when we can't see it, he is always with us. He is always working. So if you are in a time where you feel like God doesn't see and God doesn't care, or he's silent, my encouragement to you this morning is choose to trust him. Choose to trust him. Choose to put your faith in him. Choose to hope in him. And choose to believe that God is with you even though you don't feel it yet. Hold on to his promises and don't give up regardless of what you're going through. Listen, I know because there's some people in our church right here that even over the last few weeks I know of that have gone through just a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. Friends who have lost and had to bury their loved ones. And I have friends here in our church who have gotten the wrong diagnosis from a doctor and are dealing with that. And there's so many stories that I don't even know of things that are going on in people's lives. I know these stories and these struggles are real. I understand that. Let me share this verse that's always meant a lot to me over the years. Lamentations 3:22 and 23. It says, certainly the faithful love of the Lord has not ended. You need to know that. Certainly God's compassion isn't through. They are renewed every morning. Great is your faithfulness. God is faithful even when the world is harmful. God is loving even when the world is uncaring and hurtful. How do I know that? How do I believe that? Why do I believe that? I've experienced it in my own life. I've watched it in the lives of thousands of people, but mostly I see it in Jesus. I see it in Jesus who came into a very brutal world. And what did he do? He loved so perfectly. Everything didn't make sense. There was problems in that day too. And there's Jesus like, you could overthrow this whole Roman thing right now. Just do it. You're God. They even mocked him at his death, saying, if you were really the Son of God, then come down off that cross. He had that. He said, he had the authority to call a legion of angels and destroy this thing in a second. But he said, I came to serve. I came to give my life. Much of what is going on, he even told his disciples, doesn't make sense to you right now, but it will one day. I'm going to conquer this. I'm going to conquer even death. And I know this same Jesus would say to some of you and to me, and what we're going through in those seasons where it seems like he's silent and we don't understand what's going on, he would say, hold on, I've overcome this world. I have got you. And that's where faith really has to be elicited, doesn't it? It has to come out. It has to move and say, I'm going to choose to believe in a God who I believe cares for me, even though I don't see the evidence of it right now. I don't get why this has happened. I don't get why this is happening. You ever been in those times? I have. Where it's like all you have in some of those dark nights of the soul, some of those places of quiet, all you have is your faith. But let me tell you, it's all you need. It really is. And in those moments, you don't see it, but you are being transformed as you hold on to him. When everything around you is saying, cut and bail, but you hold on to him. You're building spiritual muscle that you are so unaware of. And it's not the end of the story. In fact, that's the last thing I want you to write down here. God works in both the extraordinary and the ordinary. How many of you vote for the extraordinary? I do. I'm like, just do a miracle, right? Let's do this. I mean, and I believe in that. I hope you know we as a church, we believe in that miracles do happen. He heals people. He does miracles, and sometimes we experience his goodness and grace, not instantaneously. Sometimes we experience it in the process. It's the journey of trust, the journey of surrender. Sometimes it comes just like that, and you're like, wow, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just what looks and appears to us, these random events, but God is working a miracle. We just don't see it. He's working behind the scenes, just like he did with Esther. And talking about the different kinds of spiritual gifts that God gives, the Apostle Paul, he says this, 1 Corinthians 12:6. This is great. We're going to close. It says, God works in different ways, but it is the same God who does the work in all of us. Amen. He doesn't do it the same way. And guess what? He doesn't do it Mark's way. Well, all you need to do is this. God, just do this. Can you imagine God going like, oh, whew, thank you. Whew. Wasn't sure how to handle that one. Appreciate, But we do that. God, I need you to. And it's like, Lord, come. Not my will, but yours be done. God, help me to hold on to you through the journey. To trust you. I declare your goodness over this badness. You see that, how faith talks differently? Trusting God in that. It's the same God that works in the extraordinary and in the ordinary. I want to invite the band back up. We're going to close. We're going to go into a time of worship. But I want you to remember this. Esther said this. Before she went in to see the king, she said, if I die, I die. That's heavy, right? She didn't know what was going to happen. She didn't know the outcome. But she said, you know what? I've got to do this. If I die, I die. She didn't know what was to come, and she did it anyway. She had this courage after Mordecai reminded her of something powerful. This is after Mordecai reminded her of something powerful. Remember, she was afraid. And he said to her, and this is what I want some of you to hear. He said to her, who knows, Esther, if it wasn't for such a time as this, that you even came into the kingdom. Maybe this is why you're here. I'm walking with a friend through some difficult stuff, and I'm like, man, think about how this would have been if you would have never came into the kingdom. Maybe it's for such a time as this that you came into the kingdom. It's a moment. You here this morning, you gave your heart to God at some point. You surrendered to him. Who knows if it wasn't for such a time as this that you came in here. He wants to do something through you, but first he has to do something in you. Will we trust him? Will we, like Esther, say, okay, it's time to step up. I didn't get into this palace just so I could have luxury baths. I got in here to make a difference. God did something. God's doing something with you too. Would you stand with me? I want us to pray. I don't know where you're at today, what your story is, but you might be in like, man, things are riding so cool for me right now, Mark. Excellent. I mean that. I'm happy for you. You may be here though, and you're like, yeah, this message, it relates to me because I've been asking, are you there, God? Do you see what I'm going through? I'd like you to bow your heads just for a second. I just want to pray over you. Father, I pray for anybody here today that has had those questions swirling around in their minds. And you don't look upon them with judgment or shame or what's the matter with you. You have such compassion. You know the struggles of humans. And you have great compassion and great comfort. Lord, I just pray right now that there would be just a divine ambush of comfort over the hearts and minds of somebody struggling here today. Comfort them, Lord. I speak the word of comfort over you and peace over you in the name of Jesus. And I pray all that anxiety would flee as you turn your eyes off of the cares of this world, the problems, though they're real, but you turn them on God right now and you look up to God. I pray, Lord, let there be a divine exchange in this moment. Someone's fear for your love, someone's harassment that's coming to them for your protection that's coming over them, Lord. May that anxiety dissipate right now in Jesus' name. And as they look to you, God, may your strength just enfold them right now. It's a new day. It's a different day. Today's going to be different because I'm looking to God. God, you are faithful. Your mercies are new every morning. We don't have to wonder if you'll be there for us. So I pronounce that confidence of trusting in you over every heart and soul here today. Would you receive that right now? Tell the Lord, yes, God, I look to you. Yes, I'm not going to just think about it. I'm making a move today towards you, God. I declare you are there. You are with me, Lord. Tell him, you are with me. I believe in you. I look to you. Lord, I thank you for this, God. Thank you for this, Lord. Stay standing as we just worship and have a little bit of time where this goes from head to heart in our lives. Amen.